Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson. Matthew Dickerson. Tech Talk. Sit back and relax. It's time to talk technology.
Hello, rock stars of the tech world. It's time to groom those mullets into shape. Business on top, virtual party at the back. That's right, you know what I'm talking about. It's time for Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson, and here on lead vocals, with devil fingers pointing high to raise the roof, it's Matthew Dickerson himself. Rock on, Matt. What's been going down?
Rocking on indeed. Actually, I'm intrigued this week. There's been a bit of talk over the last few weeks about where X, owned by Elon Musk, mainly owned by Elon Musk, where that fits into the whole political landscape. And when you get that much money, that you can kind of say, Australian government, I'm not listening to them. So it's an interesting discussion, interesting debate about all of that. And there is that fine line, free speech versus do I incite violence? Do I incite copycats?
Yeah.
Other social media apps have said, no, we think we should err on caution here, maybe be nice to the community. And X has said, well, you know what, we're just going to do what we want to do anyway. Comes a point sometime where you think surely too much money is a bad thing.
Yeah, well, too much money doesn't absolve you of social responsibility, does it?
Well, apparently it does. You can do whatever you like if you've got enough money to do it. So it's interesting. I don't want to make this political, but it's interesting how technology and some very wealthy tech people can say, well, we're just going to play by our own rules. Now, the Australian government can do what the Chinese government does, and they can just say, well, we're just going to block access. I don't think the Australian government wants to do that because that does seem like a little bit of a dictatorial move. But at the same time, when some people are promoting, maybe not promoting, that's too strong a word, allowing promotion of certain activities, then how far do you go? It's an interesting debate, and I'm sure it'll go on for some time to come. Yeah,
and our mate Elon, I don't know, the short snippets I've seen, he's not that articulate, he's just brash.
I think
as a billionaire as want to be.
That's right, and it's not just a billionaire, it's a multi-billionaire. When you get, whatever it is, 120 billion or whatever he's worth at the moment, when you get that much money, arrogance does probably take over. I'm sure he's changed as a person over the last 2 decades. So anyway, we'll see where that comes. It'll be an interesting discussion, interesting debate to see where the Australian government sits and all of that. On the upside, if we find Elon enough money, maybe that'll be good for our economy. Maybe there's an upside there.
Maybe you can start building spaceships here in Australia.
That's right.
All right, for those of you who like their trains fast, even super fast, well, all your Christmases have come at once today as we zip off to China to see what they're up to in Maglev tech. And for those of you who like their water pure and their exercise manageable, we've got just the thing for you too. And in the spirit of the Concorde, we'll check out what's happening by the way of modern supersonic flight today. But we begin today with a couple of stories for the security conscious. And the first story is all about a security camera born from a Batman movie. Paint Cam Eve will spot an intruder in your yard and then launch an assault. This is the ideal security camera for doomsday preppers and people with alter egos and a lycra suit in the closet. Matt, there's no way that this idea will turn into a litigious minefield. Surely.
I'm going to make a big statement here, James. We've done, I would estimate, over 1,500 stories. And this one is up there at the very top of my favourite tech stories. Just the thought process that someone went through. So, security cameras, CCTV, they are incredibly common now. They must be because in the movies and in TV series, you see that every crime is solved by looking at the CCTV that obviously everyone has around every little part.
Bingo.
So that's not that unusual to have CCTV. It's getting cheaper, it's getting better, high resolution, 4K cameras, all fantastic. But the problem is, of course, what it allows you to do is it allows you to look at what happened after it has happened. So someone steals something from a shop or breaks into a home, you can say, oh, look, there, I can see Billy Bloggs breaking in and stealing my stuff, and then there's a process to get it back, etc.
You've got to track him down, and then you've got to track the gear down that's already moved on to the next level.
And I know when we've had things stolen from one of my businesses, the police have been very good in tracking them down. And, of course, you say, well, can I get my product back? Oh, no, that's long gone. That's been sold to some pawn shop or some private individual somewhere, and so bad luck for that. So prevention is obviously a good thing. Now, when people see cameras, they might say, well, maybe I won't break in or commit that crime because it's on camera and I might get caught, so I won't do it. So sure, preventative there. but there's no prevention like being bombarded with paintball. I've played paintball. In fact, my friend, and I say friends in inverted commas, treated me to a paintball trip for my bucks party when I was getting married. And so, as you can imagine, as the buck, then I was a bit of a target for everyone. So it was exactly what you want for a bucks party, one target and everyone else having fun at their expense. But paintball hurts a bit when you're playing paintball.
Absolutely.
And you're running around, you've got goggles on to protect your eyes, and you get hit by those little bits of paint, and they do sting a little bit. So I can just imagine someone coming along to break in, and next thing you know, they're being bombarded with paintball. You're probably going to say, I'm not going to stay here and continue on. Although maybe you do, because maybe you say, wow, if they've got some paintballs firing at me, they must have something really valuable inside. I'm going to wait till it runs out of paintballs and then I'm going to go. But the next step, if the paintballs don't do it, you've also got tear gas pellets.
I read that in your notes and thought, oh, no. Like, paintball, you can have a bit of a giggle as you're watching on the camera, but the tear gas, it's starting to get to next level, isn't it?
Oh, that is. So you can just imagine someone coming along, hit with a few paintballs. That's all right. I'll withstand those, or I'll wait till it runs out.
And the guy's just trying to drop off a package.
Well, that's exactly what I thought. I thought you can guarantee you'll never receive a delivery from Australia Post again. The guy comes back from his round going, what's all the paint over you? I deliver at the Dickerson place today. So it does sound incredible. But I think the logic of it is quite interesting. Self-defense options, non-lethal, that's fine.
Sure.
It does give you verbal warning. So to be fair, it says, please move away, otherwise you'll be hit with some paintball. And you'd hear that and you'd think, yeah, sure. Once you get hit by the first one, you might think, okay, they're not mucking around now. The tear gas one, I think, is probably the next level. But there are some pretty clever bits of technology in it. It does have facial recognition, so you can get it to learn your delivery man, someone that delivers your parcels, the local Australia Post person. So it sees the face of that person and says, nah, everything's okay, it's all good. It also does have the ability, as most CCTV does, to go back to your phone, so you can actually say, oh, yes, that's okay, that's someone dropping off a parcel to me, or that's a friend I know coming around. So don't bombard that person with paintballs, or that does look like actually someone trying to break in. Hit them now, go for it. I couldn't find out how many paintballs it can store. And one of the problems here, as I talk about all this, it's not actually available yet. There is a Kickstarter campaign to fund this and to get people to actually go forward. I don't know what areas, what countries it's available in or will be available in, because surely, as you mentioned there, the litigation. So
yeah,
surely,
I just think here in Australia, where we've got more litigation per capita than any other country in the world.
Well, we've beaten America now, aren't we? We're in front of them. So we get to that point where you've got to have some regulations around it, but I can't imagine the regulations are going to be easy. So I don't know where it's available, but go and have a look at it. It's called Paint Cam Eve, and it does look quite interesting. But I said, again, just for the brashness of this, it almost goes to the top of my list.
The next
stories
one will
we've done.
have rubber bullets. Then who knows what.
And then if you're in
device.
Texas, it's probably real bullets that you have firing at you. So, anyway, it sounds quite fascinating.
Well, slightly less crazy and slightly more in line with the concept of a reasonable degree of defence comes an AI doorbell from an Australian company that is far less likely to see you defending yourself in a civil lawsuit. So good news there, folks. A much more mild option, the doorbell is designed to respond to visitors, wanted or unwanted, and simulate a human presence at home. So no tear gas option on this one, Matt.
No tear gas option on this one. It sounds a bit boring after the last one, doesn't it? This one just says AI that talks to you. Now, one of the problems with the various doorbells that are available where you can press a button and have a conversation with someone and the person doesn't know whether that person's inside the house or on the other side of the world. You have a conversation via your smartphone, wherever you might be. That's fantastic, but it assumes that you're always available. You're in a meeting and suddenly you see the doorbell ring on your phone. You go, I've just got to duck out of this meeting and just see who there is at my door. And so it's not always perfect. You could be on a plane. You mightn't have access to the internet. You might be asleep somewhere else in the world that someone comes and rings a doorbell. So it's not ideal. And probably the crims, who are a bit clever with some of the stuff they do, they might ring the doorbell and they know what type of doorbell it is. They get no response. They go, right, well, this person isn't home, but they're also not available to see me breaking into their place, so I can go for it. This particular idea is quite clever. It's called Home Shield, put out by Swann. So Swann's a good Australian company. And the idea is that the AI will interact like a human. So it can have a conversation with you, even though there's no human on the other end of this having a conversation.
Yeah,
this means that whenever someone rings a doorbell, it means they're going to have a conversation with someone. So they assume that that person's probably home. Can I come in? No, sorry, I'm just out of the shower, or whatever it might be. The conversation can go in whatever direction you want, but ultimately you think you're having a conversation. I do like one of the settings on there. They've got 10 different voice options to not the person like male, female type voice options, but the style, the tone. So you can have friendly, you can have aggressive, for example. You can have different time zones or different times of the day for what type of response you might get. So after 10 o'clock at night, you might be in the aggressive mode. 9 o'clock in the morning, delivery person might be there. Sure, just do it in a nice friendly mode. But at 10 o'clock at night, why is someone ringing my doorbell? Probably because they want to see if someone's home. So give them a bit more of an aggressive response, because you might have just been woken up from your nice little slumber you're going to at night. So I think this is actually quite a clever use. And there's a lot out there in the doorbell space. Ring, the company Ring, probably really not invented the space, but really probably owned that space for a time. But there's many others that are out there at the moment. But there's none others that are like this, where you've got this whole AI tool that's able to go through and actually have that conversation. One of the secrets to it is a thing called AWS Bedrock. So this is a new service that gives you incredibly low latency. So they said the latency is down to 10 milliseconds. Not much good if someone presses the doorbell and the conversation they're having has got a lag, a 1 second lag every time having a conversation, because someone says, hold on, I don't think that person's just inside. Yeah. So the whole idea of Bedrock is that it gives you this low latency. So you make it feel like you're definitely having that local conversation. So maybe more gentle option. We are talking about trying to stop crims here. So
yeah, that's right. And a lot less litigation if you just get yelled at.
I think so. I don't think it's very likely you're going to say, well, that guy was a bit aggressive with me at 10 o'clock at night. Let's sue him. So whether you want tear gas, paintballs, or just a conversation with AI, there's options there for you.
China is racing into the next quarter of the 21st century, and they're not looking over their shoulder to see what the rest of the world is doing. This time they're all excited about Maglev trains, folks. With near zero friction, you can achieve incredible speeds in a Maglev train that'll leave all but a few military aircraft for dead. And their goal is somewhere up around Mark 3, from what I gather. Matt, that is some fast rail action.
I know, and I wrote an article about this, and people thought I made a typo when I was talking about going at Mach 3. Did you mean Mach 0.3? Did you have a decimal point in the wrong spot there? I said Mach 3.3, not 0.33, and that's exactly it, 3, 3. So let's go back a little step. In fact, as you know, I was only in Japan a few weeks ago. I was on the Shinkansen in Japan, so they go up to about 320 kilometres an hour, and I did pull out my speed app on my phone, and I didn't quite get over 300 on that particular trip, but yeah, typically they can get up to that 320.
Wasn't there one? I thought there was one in Japan that went 600.
Well, they've done some testing on ones that have been getting up to 600, but certainly the Shinkansen in Japan, you look at it, you go, it's a strange shaped train.
It's one with a really long nose, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And again, trying to reduce that air resistance, but you've got tracks that look like train tracks, and you've got wheels that look like normal wheels, and you think, wow, how do they do that? And presumably they just make it a very straight, very smooth track, and then ramp up the speed, and obviously low air resistance from that big bullet, or the big nose that looked like a bullet. Then you've got China, and in China you've got some fast trains as well, but they do already have a maglev train, and I've been on this one as well. It was a few years ago I was over there, and there's a trip that you go from the Shanghai Pudong airport into Shanghai. Now, it's roughly, I think, 30 kilometres or thereabouts, and you do it in about 7 or 8 minutes. So that train can get up to about 430 kilometres an hour. So that's pretty impressive in terms of a train. And again, they haven't got a lot of those around China because the infrastructure, building the infrastructure is a bit of a challenge. And when you think, well, I've got train lines and I'll just make them a bit better, I can go 300 odd kilometres an hour. Go to Maglev, 400 kilometres an hour. For all the extra infrastructure, it's not really worth it. But let's now look at what China's starting to do with some maglev stuff. They're already doing testing on this current maglev, getting up to about 623 kilometres an hour. So now we're getting a bit serious.
Yeah, wow.
And that's in testing they've done. But what they're estimating is they think that this train can get up to 4,000 kilometres an hour. Now, the big problem we've talked about many times, that's a lot, isn't it? We've talked about before, double speed, quadruple air resistance. That's one of the big impediments to going faster, whether it be planes or trains or automobiles. So in this one, they're doing the same as Elon Musk's Hyperloop. They've created a vacuum tube to do some of the testing in. At this stage, it's only 2 kilometre vacuum tube. But the idea here is you'll have your normal train station at normal air pressure, and then you'll go into an airlock. I imagine that's a little bit slow at the start of the journey. People are going, what's this? I want to go fast. This is meant to be a super duper maglev train. And then you go through the maglev and then sit back, folks, because we've got to get up to some speed and we've got to do it fairly quickly. Yeah. So they believe with the combination of maglev, so as you said, very minimal resistance because you're levitating on the magnets, you're floating on the magnets, and you're also being propelled by the magnets, you're getting up to very fast speeds along that. But then, of course, the air resistant, put this in a low vacuum tube. I'm not going to say vacuum because obviously there is still some air in there. Yeah. And then, of course, the train is a bit like a plane. It's pressurised. There's not a lot of oxygen at 36,000 feet, so you obviously have to be pressurised in a plane. Same thing here. You'll be in a tube that's got very low air pressure, reduce the air resistance, and then away you go in this tube. Now, there's a bit of work to get that air pressure reduced inside the tube. The tube has to be fairly strong to support the fact that there's a lot of air pressure pushing down on the outside of that tube. Underground, you would imagine mostly they would be. I just thought the pumping to get all that air out of a big tube, there's a fair bit of work to do there. You wouldn't want to have someone leave the airlock open accidentally for a little while because there'd be a huge amount of air that would rush in and that'd cause a problem.
Assuming that you've got to board this thing, how they get people to board this thing through an airlock and whatnot. So, yeah.
Well, I imagine they'd board at a train station at normal pressure and then you'd get on and then you'd go into an airlock which would then lock back behind you and then it would go into the low vacuum tube and then away you'd go. It all sounds fascinating to me, and I would love to see. I've got a major problem in Australia with the lack of very fast trains, the lack of even forget the very fast. We even have a lack of fast trains.
Well, one of our problems is we're in a temperate region with temperature fluctuations that causes all sorts of issues for you
when you're on when you get on a track. But maybe with maglev, you're not having those same problems with the tracks on a train.
Yeah, but you'd still have that tube. Oh, we're in a tectonically very stable sort of place as well. So. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that gets me is the Melbourne to Sydney route. I look back at some pre-pandemic numbers. So there were 54,000 flights, actually over 54,000 flights a year between Melbourne and Sydney. That's number 2 in the world for flights between 2 locations. Wow. So it's a busy route. And then I looked at passenger numbers, nearly 10 million seats, not all full, but 10 million seats on those planes between Sydney and Melbourne in a year. That's the 5th busiest in the world by passenger seats.
Wow.
So if ever there's an argument for a train between 2 locations, then surely Melbourne-Sydney is that argument. So building a very fast train there would be fantastic. Doing it at 4,000 kilometres an hour, well, that's a little way away. But even doing it at 600 kilometres an hour, the thing that I love about train travel, if the train leaves, and particularly in Japan, if the train leaves at 9:02, you turn up at 9:01 on the platform and the train will be there at 9:02 and you walk on and get on. You don't have to line up for a long time getting through a whole bunch of security. You don't have to be there half an hour before for your bag to go through. You travel on a plane. Some flights I go on, I'm spending longer at the airport and going through all the security and getting my bag checked in than the actual flight because the flight isn't usually that long. Yeah. And then when you land and take off at an airport, they're typically out of the city centre. Trains typically go into the city centre. So there's a lot of time to be saved at both ends.
So many pluses here.
So even if we did if we did Sydney-Melbourne at, say, 400 kilometres an hour, the actual travel might take you a bit longer, but the actual trip door to door would certainly be faster. So I hope that maglev really gets going in China. I hope the technology is developed to the point where it's cheaper. Maybe they'll have some second-hand trains.
Sydney to Perth in less than an hour.
Yeah.
You could commute. You could live in Perth and commute to Sydney.
And again, the problem I have there is just the cost of that infrastructure.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
it would be hard to justify that one. But that's where I look at that Sydney to Melbourne because it's so heavily trafficked now. 10 million seats. Sydney to Melbourne. Imagine just a train that went in each direction every half an hour. A lot better for the environment, but again, you'd be there so much quicker.
If you live near the train station, and let's say they've got a 200-kilometre track, you're ducking home because you left something. I just left something at home. I'm just going to go and duck home.
Back in a few minutes.
Back in a few minutes. So and the G-forces, it's not going to hit 4,000 kilometres an hour in an instant, but the G-forces still.
It's still got to get to that speed,
You're
going
to have to do fighter pilot training, aren't you?
That's right. Put on this compressed suit to be able to get on there. So it does sound fascinating. But maybe with some of these developments around the world, if Australia's not taking off like I'd like it to, maybe we get some second-hand ones from somewhere. So maybe some second-hand trains out of China, out of Shinkansen's out of Japan and go, well, you're not using those anymore. You're going to Maglev. We'll just take your old rolling stock and just do 300 kilometres an hour and you can go and take off. It is quite fascinating. So keep an eye out for that one. And look, Hyperloop is being developed, so maybe there'll be some competition there with some Maglev over in China and some Hyperloop maybe in America. But again, it's developing quickly, and then you start to wonder, do we really need all that plane travel, especially as we start looking at the environmental impact of plane travel?
Well, the other thing is it's enormously energy efficient because you're not dealing with heat losses and friction and whatnot, and you're only turning on the bits of the magnet that are in front of the train and behind the train to give that acceleration or the braking effect. And so it's just an amazing sort of thing. You do have to keep. You've got electromagnets that are made with superconductors, so you've got to keep them cold. So that's where the big costs are. Yeah,
and so you're right, energy-wise. But when you're flying in a plane, there's an amount of energy that you spend to get up there to the height that you need to get to, and the amount of energy you're spending to actually keep it airborne. So you're not all of your energy can say you're transferring that to forward motion, whereas in a maglev train, there's a huge amount of that energy that goes to going forward. So that's pretty exciting. Anyway, quite fascinating. I do love fast trains. I'd love to see many more of them.
Space, as we say so often.
Or at least some in Australia.
The Saturday morning hum of lawnmowers throughout suburbia soon to become just another memory of the last century. Garden tool manufacturers are predicting that with impending developments in battery technology, the end is nigh for the familiar smell of lawn clippings mixed with petrol fumes. The range of garden-based electric products is expanding and makes a lot of sense, Matt.
It does make a lot of sense, and I'm proud to say, James, that many years ago, my house became petrol-free. All of my garden tools, all of my bits and pieces, I've talked about it before, robotic lawnmower, I've had all those things converted a long time ago. And it seems like things are happening and maybe happening a bit quicker. So Husqvarna, for example, said that they've got 40% of all of their products now are battery-powered. And that's a fairly fast change. It wasn't that long ago that you would have said it would have been hard to get a battery-powered whippersnipper or a battery-powered chainsaw, but now things are happening. By 2026, they say they'll have 60% of their products that are battery-powered. The challenge for Husqvarna and other companies that are going down this path is really when you get to the heavy-duty application. So and the estimation from Husqvarna, for example, was when they've got engines in their various products that are above 50 cc's, that's when they start to get at the stage where they go, we're struggling to be able to deliver that via battery technology. Not so much struggling to deliver it. You can do that. You can do a car. So you can do something like that, but it's just the convenience factor. You can put a big battery in a car because you're driving around on four wheels. It's a bit harder to put a big battery in a whippersnipper or a chainsaw. If you put this huge battery on there that makes it too heavy to lift up and use, it defeats the purpose of it a little bit. But we are getting advancements in batteries, advancements in density. We've talked about it before, getting more energy per kilogram of batteries. That's a big change that we'll need to see with this. And also prices. As the prices start to come down, the convenience factor of being able to use these products at a cheaper price and then the recharging of those.
And the recharging, So, well, you don't need an enormous battery in your whippersnipper. You want to keep it fairly small. You can afford to have 2 or 3 batteries and just having them sitting on the recharger.
That's right.
And you can be going for several hours without being interrupted. If you love your whippersnippery.
That's if you want to do it that badly. There's also the impracticality they talked about when you've got commercial companies that might be out there doing a full day work. So, for example, commercial people that are doing the lawn care for various customers, they go out in the morning and they're out all day going around to the various clients. They probably don't want to have 50 batteries on their car and they don't want to come back halfway through the day and charge up. So getting to the stage where you've got that ability. But again, with a lot of EV utes, for example, now they've got charging points. So typically you could have a number of batteries, have them charging while you're working and then switch over. Yeah. Plus you get a lot of the companies now that are at the point where they've got one battery that fits multiple devices. So it doesn't matter whether it's a drill or a sander or a whippersnipper or a mower, and sometimes the mowers might have 2 of the batteries that need to work in tandem for that mower to have that extra power it needs. So these are all changing. So again, I agree with you entirely. That smell of cut grass and petrol, which is a common smell around the suburbs of Australia.
I love it though. But it's one of those things that we just have to surrender.
Well, here's the interesting part. You love that smell because we've grown up with that smell. I wonder if you remove the petrol fumes from that smell, whether the cut grass is the smell that we really love at that, or we do love the combination of that.
Combination.
Yeah, so maybe. But you're getting some big organisations too. So, for example, Taronga Zoo in Sydney, the Canberra Institute of Technology in Canberra, obviously, are starting to use Husqvarna robotic lawnmowers. So it's getting to the stage where large organisations, so not just around the home, not just around my house to mow my little 700 square metres of lawn, getting larger companies, larger organisations to do larger patches of grass. And let's face it, it's a bit of a tedious process. Some people enjoy it. Some people like the relaxing nature of just going up and back and not having to worry about anything, listen to the footy or listen to a bit of music or whatever. But when you've got to do it to keep the grounds nice for a commercial entity, then it becomes a bit of a chore and becomes a cost chore.
Did I also read somewhere battery-powered tractors as well? So you attach like a, what do you call it, the slasher attachment to them, and you can do big paddocks and stuff?
Well, here's the thing that I've always thought made sense to me. Tractors typically have counterweights at the front. So you'll see a tractor that's designed to tow some small thing and to stop it doing a wheelie. I'm not sure if tractor wheelie is a thing, but to stop it popping up the front end, there'll typically be a bunch of weights on the front. And I remember looking at that one day going, well, we know one of the problems in inverted commas with an electric vehicle is the extra weight from the battery, but here's a device, here's a tractor that they deliberately put extra weights on. So hold on, remove those weights and just put a big battery there. You've got the counterweight built in as part of the actual device itself. So there's no extra weight for the battery. The battery is part of the usage of that. So I thought that was a great idea. So it makes sense that you're going to get batteries on tractors. You're going to get tractors that use that. And again, we know, James, that the torque, all that torque from basically zero revs, that's what tractors want. Tractors don't need horsepower as such. They need torque. They need that instant low-end power. So for a tractor, it makes a lot of sense. So it will happen. You just got to get people to get their head wrapped around the idea of EVs in everything they do.
There's a bit of pushback from the petrol heads too. But look, I've got a petrol whippersnipper and a battery-operated one. I never use the petrol one anymore. It just needs servicing, and it's just messy. And I've got to mix up the fuel for it. For the it's just annoying.
And if you actually did the cost of it, if you calculate the cost, not that it costs that much to run a whippersnipper, but if you did the cost of a year of running a whippersnipper, how much petrol you'd buy for it, it would be a lot more expensive to run than a whippersnipper on a battery. So it makes sense from that perspective. But things are changing.
Our understanding of good health has increased markedly over the past 40 years. The numbers of active gym memberships, along with participation in physically active community groups and sporting teams, would have to be much greater throughout Australia than it was back in the 80s. And the volume of bottled water consumed per week has gone from, well, why the hell would you even buy bottled water, to over 10 litres per capita per week here in Australia. Microbe outbreaks in local water supplies of Giardia and Cryptosporidium have bred paranoia and seen the bottled water industry explode. But that may all change if, just by exercising, you could purify your own water and stay hydrated from the kitchen tap, Matt.
Is that 10 litres of purchased bottled water
water per week per capita?
Person. Wow.
So someone else is drinking a whole lot more than I am.
Yeah, that's right. And I do like...
Or they're bathing in it.
Maybe that's it.
Yeah.
And we don't need...
I tend to drink from the tap.
Well,
I drink from the hose.
Good.
Yeah, that's something I used to do back in the day. But,
that's right. I remember being out sometimes with friends when we were young kids, and you just pop into someone's front yard and use their hose if you got hot on a hot day, and you'd have a quick drink from there and hope they didn't come out and yell at you, and off you'd go again. So, I think tap water is fine. But it's interesting because in Australia, the water standard we have across motels, etc., we can drink and share in that without closing our mouth, whereas some countries, I can imagine, you might be using a lot of bottled water because you can't have a shower without keeping your mouth completely closed. So you can't even clean your teeth with the water that comes out of the tap. You've got to use bottled water for everything. But in Australia, we're fine. So I'm fascinated by that, 10 litres per person.
Well, yeah, look, and as I read it, I thought, I've got to fact check that. I just Googled it, and then I went with what came up with the first search, and then thought, the scientist in me knows that you just can't go with that.
That's right. So
check your sources.
put an
folks.
asterisk next to that
a little
one.
asterisk, but it's a lot more than what it was back in the 80s.
That's right. It was a great scam by someone to come up with, let's bottle water that you can get out of the tap and sell it to people.
Well, a lot of them are just drawing it straight from the tap.
Probably are. Forget all the processing with various carbonated, sugared water. So anyway, on to the story. Sorry. The idea here is that you've got a 500 milliliter bottle with a special polymer electrode. Now, the electrode contains nanorods made from conducting polymer polypyrrole. How's that sound? Polypyrrole?
Yeah, that'll do.
So essentially what happens is you're creating static electricity as you walk, and that essentially allows that static electricity to feed into the bottle, and in the nanorods it creates an electric field that's powerful enough to deactivate harmful bacteria and viruses in the water. So essentially you put some aluminium foil, not on your head, some aluminium foil attached to the outside of the bottle, collects the static electricity from your hand as you carry it along, and voila, away you go. So a 10-minute walk can generate enough static electricity to basically get about 100 mils or so clean, ready for you to drink. Here we go along, we find a river, we scoop up some water from the river, we have that water in our hand, we walk for another 10, 20, 30 minutes, and then we go, this water is okay to drink now. So how cool is that? So
well, it's not filtering the water, so you scoop it out of there might be some undissolved particulates in there.
There might be, that's right.
But people are really paranoid about tap water.
So you could put tap water in here, which looks pretty clear when it comes out, and you could basically have that, and then after walking for a period of time, you know that water has had a deactivation of the bacteria and viruses that might be in the water. So things you can't see. So there's no turbidity in that water you would hope that comes out of the tap, but you can't really see any little viruses or bacteria in there. But by doing this, you're taking care of that. So forget about buying your bottled water. You can just buy one of these bottles, use tap water, and then be confident that as you do your exercise, as you do your walking, static electricity is being generated. But keep in mind a couple of things. The shoes that you wear change how much static electricity you generate. So if you wear shoes
walk around in your socks.
Well, yeah, and rub them on the carpet, that's right. If you wear shoes that are made from synthetic materials, that creates more static electricity than leather, for example. And most people, if they're out exercising, you would imagine would have some sort of synthetic shoes on. So that's a good thing. The amount of humidity in the air changes how much static electricity, which we know, but if it's more humid, it'll decrease the efficiency of the static electricity collection. So
Yeah.
So little things like that. But I suppose where they're really focused on this is you've got a disaster zone, you've got an area that's underdeveloped that doesn't have a tap that you can turn on and get clean, healthy drinking water out of, and maybe not even a good power supply. And so you say to people, well, drinking water, that's a fundamental thing that we need to stay healthy, because so many things can happen from drinking water. Here you go, here's a drink bottle for you, just hold on to this in this certain way, and as you walk around doing things for the day, as you walk down to the well to gather water from the well, you put it back in this, and as you walk back, by the time you get back to the house, you've got water that's clean to drink.
Talking about a disaster zone, you can have just a hand-operated dynamo that you could be turning and purifying water, and so one person's job might be just to turn this handle to purify like litres and litres and litres and litres of water.
You get the guy who's the fittest in the village and say, there's a little exercise bike for you that's hooked up to generate static electricity. This is all being generated or developed out of South Korea, out of Yonsei University in South Korea. And I do like the fact, we've talked about water a little bit on this podcast. I do like the fact that there are a whole range of different solutions that people are coming up with, and this is a new one. I haven't seen this one before, just by out walking enough static electricity to generate some clean water. Sounds pretty cool.
Interestingly, and a side note, I remember in the late 90s, bottled water really took off. Sydney had a Giardia cryptosporidium outbreak, and I remember we were all boiling our water back in those days. I think it was about 97 or 98. But I think the issue wasn't that there'd been an outbreak so much as our testing equipment had improved and realised that we were able to detect it more easily.
So it was sailing through before and no problems here, and then suddenly...
So I don't know if someone else can correct me on that, but
Look, it may well be right, and that's probably part of the thing. Even the Australian drinking water standards, turbidity level of 1 used to be the standard, and they changed. Well, it hasn't been changed officially. It's just been a recommendation to change that to 0.5. So again, same sort of the concept where water that was being treated and it was going through at 0.6, 0.7, that's all okay, it's below 1. Now, that water, we better do something about that. You better boil it because the turbidity is at 0.5. That was just a change in a number, not even the change in the testing equipment. So we're getting better at making sure we've got clean, healthy drinking water though.
Griefbots are probably not something that you're terribly familiar with at the moment, but they are essentially, just as the name suggests, an AI to help you through the grieving process. They're designed to enable you another chance to talk to a loved one who has passed away. Matt, this one might take a little while for the heebie-jeebies to pass, I feel, don't you think?
Well, there's a bit of debate about this as to whether it's a good idea or not. And I think it's more about the time frame. And I know my mum passed away a few years ago, and I used to ring my mum randomly. There'd be something that would pop up or something that I'd see, and I'd go, Mum would be interested in that. I'll give Mum a quick call. And for the first couple of months after that, I found myself doing that, and then I'd go, I can't give Mum a call now. And sometimes I'd ring one of my family members, ring one of my siblings and say, I was just about to ring Mum and tell her this, but I thought you might be interested as well. And so probably that was my way of dealing with that, because obviously I couldn't ring Mum, so I still wanted to have a conversation with someone. And I think that's where we're going with some of these things, by feeding data into a Griefbot. And there's a new term, a term that I didn't think I'd be using a few years ago. By feeding data in, so you get their voice, you get some samples of their voice. We know we've done it on this podcast. We've sampled both your voice and my voice and ended up with some voices that were very similar, if we were Americans, to what our voices sound like. Yeah. And then you feed in some information. So some emails, for example, some messages, some text messages, anything where this particular person has written things down, and then the AI in this Griefbot will take all that and then will use the same type of language and simulate the voice of the person that they've actually trying to replicate. Now, I can see this being useful at a funeral, for example. You didn't get a chance to say goodbye to our loved one. Go over in the corner there and you can have a conversation with the loved one on the day of the funeral. People are very emotional. People might want to say their last goodbyes, and they might feel that they're connected to that person there on the day. Doing it 6 months later, I'm no psychologist, but I just don't know whether that sounds healthy, and that's a part of the debate about that. So
drawing grief out.
Yeah, that's right. Now, the debate around this says that there's no real evidence yet to show that this is actually helping people with the mourning process, but it's early days. You haven't got a lot of data to talk about with Griefbots to see whether it's helping. But some experts are saying that it might help in those early days, but then as it goes on, then short-term interaction compared to long-term interaction, is that actually going to be helpful? So you might get to the point some people might be emotionally dependent on this Griefbot and really have the Griefbot as part of their life on an ongoing basis, which doesn't sound like it's going to be a healthy thing. But we're exploring this whole world, James, of AI. We're exploring what is consciousness.
So many new things, yeah.
What is a person? If this Griefbot gives me the same answer as a loved one would have given me, what's the difference? Some of my kids don't live in the same town as me, so most of my conversations with them are via a phone call. Well, if I got the same answer, the same interaction as a phone call, what's the difference there between the real conversation and a Griefbot? It's a hard one to know.
Bingo. And I just think it probably opens up a can of worms here, but you might be able to have a conversation with someone like Robert Menzies, John F. Kennedy,
Albert Einstein.
Martin Luther King, Albert Einstein. Yeah,
that's right.
Just these resurrecting these people from the grave to have conversations with them.
So when you pick Albert Einstein, for example, and you say, let's feed his voice and his lots of written words from Albert and obviously lots of his voice into an AI tool, and then say, okay, you are developing your theory of relativity, and now we've got all this information. We've shown some of your theories to be correct. It took a long time for some of them to be shown to be correct. With the
general relativity was a big one,
with the tools, with the actual physical tools. Obviously, Albert very much a theoretical physicist, and then someone had to go out and do the practical side of that. Now we've got all this information, Albert. What's next? If you're alive today with all this extra information, what would you next come up with? I don't know whether this tool, using all of Albert's information.
You might just say, "Oh, leave me alone. I just want to go back to sleep."
That's right. I've done my work. You built on it. Good work to you. So, Griefbot, that's a thing to explore, maybe-ish.
Apple iPhones have accidentally kicked an absolute political hornet's nest, breaching into the highest of highly sensitive territory just recently. One might describe this as a phenomenal geopolitical gaffe. Matt, if I were texting someone on an iPhone, say, anything about the capital city of Israel, which of all the emojis would you expect Apple to offer up?
Well, this is the problem, isn't it? I don't want to get into politically sensitive areas. Apple doesn't want to do that. There's no value for them. But with the latest update, iOS 17.4.1, if you type in Jerusalem, you get a very helpful predictive text feature that pops up a Palestinian flag. Now, popping up any flag associated with Jerusalem can be a bit sensitive.
Exactly.
And it's great when you type thanks and a little emoji pops up, or you say, I'm praying for you, and a couple of little hands pop up as a little praying signal. That's all lovely. But when you get something like that pop up, depending on your thoughts, that might be incredibly offensive, or it might be something you think is fantastic. But Apple are saying this is a mistake driven by the predictive text algorithm. No human at Apple, according to Apple, has programmed Jerusalem to equal Palestinian flag. But the algorithm that's come up, maybe it's picked up people typing Jerusalem and then using the flag and then saying, the algorithm goes, lots of people are using that. I'll put that as an automatic predictive text feature. Now, interestingly enough, I tried it. I thought, okay, I want to see what happens here. And I typed Jerusalem and nothing. There was no prediction there. And it did say that it varied by user. It varied by where you were. It varied by obviously the iOS version that you're on. So Apple has said it's no statement from our employees. It's not some sort of secret little protest by our employees.
Everyone just needs to chill out.
That's right. And what I did find interesting, though, I thought something like that, because, again, Apple, there's no value for Apple to be involved in a politically contentious issue.
No.
I thought they would have fixed this immediately. They said, that's okay, we'll fix it in our next release. And I went, I don't know if the next release was good enough. Maybe you needed to fix it now. Maybe now that you know about it, fix it immediately. So it is interesting, though. You type in a capital of, if you type in London, you type in Washington, D.C., you don't get a flag that pops up as a suggestion. So that's where it seemed that maybe it was a political statement by their employees, but apparently not. And
I wonder how many emojis have actually got the terms that are blocked on them, like those.
That's true too.
Do not show this if this term is used.
Yeah, that's right. And obviously that's something that maybe not some sort of algorithm has to do. Maybe that's something that
just a rule,
a human has to go.
In.
We need to add that in. So it just goes to show that algorithms are okay, but they can't be perfect and can't take into account all the different sensitivities.
Seasoned video editors amongst us are highly likely to have come across the classic Adobe software, Premiere Pro, as they fine-tune their art. Having used it myself, it's helped me make threateningly monotonous family videos a little more watchable, but I reckon I only tapped into about half of its potential. The folks at Adobe acknowledged this, and so to give your videos a little more edge in 2024, they've dropped in some AI functions, and now everyone can be just like James Cameron. What do you reckon, Matt? Is this going to fire our creative juices or just simply cover up a lack thereof?
Well, I think you're being incredibly generous with my skills. My skills saying 50%. I reckon when I use something like Premiere Pro, I'm scratching about 5% of the potential tools that are there, because you've really got to be into it and using it and absorbed by it to find out all the wonderful little features that are in there.
Yeah.
But wouldn't it be easier if we could just type some text in and say, can you blur that person's face in the background? I don't want them in the shot. That's a complicated process to do if you're doing it on Premiere Pro or any video editing tool. But if you just tell a tool to do it, wouldn't that be better? And that's exactly the path that Premiere Pro is going down. Now, there's a bit of an issue within Adobe because some of their tools, their AI tools they're developing in-house, are not as good as some of the external tools that are being developed more or less as plugins. Now, Adobe wants you to stay within the family, so they're looking at a few partnerships where you can take some of these tools and integrate them into Adobe Premiere Pro. And I think that makes a lot of sense. But it used to be, and I remember many years ago, I used to do a lot of Microsoft Access programming. And I remember there was one particular thing I wanted to do one time. It was something simple like removing the X in the top right-hand corner of the program. I wrote about 20 lines of code to do that and make it all work. And the next version came out and there was a checkbox that said, remove X. You could tick it or not tick it. And I'm going, all that programming I did, what did I waste my time on that for? And I wonder whether some video editing people that are specialists in this are a bit concerned because they go, well, to put that smudge on someone's face or to do some wonderful little thing in my video editing, it's a lot of skill, a lot of experience, a lot of practice to get there. And now, what? You're just going to tell an AI tool to go and do it for you? What's the point of all that work I've done and all that experience I've got? But to make the average Joe Blow like you and I make their family videos a bit better or some little basic video, I love the idea of being able to just type in text and say, please go and do this for me. And then you watch it and you go, done. How did you do that? I don't care. It's done.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so keep an eye on that. I think we're going to see a lot. There's obviously other competitors to Premiere Pro. Vegas Pro is another one, obviously. There are ones out there, and I just think we're going to see more and more AI integrated in all this, which is better for those movie nights at home, surely. It's going to be much better for
those family home videos, they can get pretty long, can't they? Particularly for other people. But if you can soup them up a little bit.
Yeah, that's right. Go and make this more interesting. You might find, though, your 20-minute video, you tell AI to make it more interesting and it ends up with a 30-second video. Maybe that's not quite what you want.
A new era of flying is approaching thanks to the aeronautical company Boom Supersonic, testing their XB-1 model over the Mojave Desert. Their goal is to improve commercial flight, and to do that, they want to go fast, and they want to do it with new lighter materials, and they want to run new tech in the cockpit. Look out, Buck Rogers. Here comes the XB-1. Matt, what's all the hubbub about?
Well, this is the new Concorde, finally. I never got to fly on the Concorde, and I would have liked to have flown on the Concorde, but didn't get the chance and whatever. But we all heard that supersonic travel was basically gone. Once the Concorde was retired, that was the end of it because, we've talked about it before, you get a plane that goes really fast, then it takes a lot of energy to do that, and we're trying to be more energy efficient in what we do. So it was probably dead. But Boom, and we've talked about Boom before when they made some announcements on things they were doing, some testing they were doing. It just gives you an idea of how long it takes to get to the stage where a plane can go from an idea, a couple of guys sitting around having a discussion, to actually being a plane that people get onto. 2014 was when the founder, Blake Scholl, basically created this company. So there was probably some discussion before that, but 2014, I'm going to go and make a supersonic plane to replace the Concorde. At this stage, now, here we are in 2024, the best we've got from Boom is a 1/3 size model that doesn't fly at supersonic speeds, but is testing out things. 2029 is the year they've said the Boom supersonic plane will fly. So that's from 2014, start the company, to 2029. That's a long lead time. You presumably can't sell your first product until 2029. They've already got 130 orders for planes from major airlines. That's assuming everything goes to plan. But this is the first step, well, not the first step, this is a step along the process. So they've got their XB-1 prototype. It flew in March. Flew for 12 minutes, flew up 2,171 metres, flew at 439 kilometres per hour. That's not supersonic. So,
well short of supersonic.
Well short. Now, I'm going to have a discussion about supersonic in a moment, what that means. They've got some older GE jet engines they were using, only produced 54,700 newtons of thrust. So not fantastic for doing that, but they're really testing construction materials, testing the aerodynamic design. It's a lot of work to go to take it out of a wind tunnel, put it up in the air and test all these things. They've got augmented reality vision they were testing out, carbon fibre composites they're testing out. When they get to the stage where they're flying for real, their engines will produce 155,000 newtons of thrust, so that's getting a bit more serious about it all. But it seems like it's going to happen, and that's the exciting part here. So I'll get a chance finally to fly on a supersonic plane at some stage. The Overture, which is what they'll call it, will house between 64 and 80 passengers, depending how individual airlines set it up. They're talking about Mach 1.7, so not as fast as a train, but still not too bad compared to normal planes. And again, hopefully by 2029 we'll get there. Now, I just want to have a quick discussion about when we talk about Mach. So Mach, obviously people Mach 1, speed of sound. So what's the speed of sound? Well, interesting question there, James. Speed of sound varies with temperature. So when we talk about the speed of sound, you can use the formula. The speed of sound is 331.3 metres per second plus 0.606 multiplied by the temperature in degrees Celsius. So at ground level, if you're talking about...
In year 11, we just used 340 metres per second. But anyway, let's keep going.
Well, and that's often it, because if you said 20 degrees Celsius, that's about right. You'd get to around that 340 metres per second. So at 0 degrees Celsius, 1193 kilometres an hour. 20 degrees Celsius, 1236 kilometres an hour. But when you talk about planes, you're talking about up high, and you go roughly per kilometre you go up, you lose about 6.5 degrees Celsius. So if you go to minus 50 degrees Celsius, and, you know, when I'm in a plane and it's got the little readout of how fast you're travelling, all that sort of stuff, I often see minus 40, minus 50 degrees Celsius. So I think I won't put my hand out the window of the plane. Might be a bit cold out there. At minus 50 degrees Celsius, you're talking about 1,083 kilometres an hour. And the reason I mention all this, which sounds a bit technical and potentially boring, but the reason I mention all this is that we just talked about Mach 3.3 for a train, but that train's probably going to be at sea level-ish and at temperatures of maybe 15 to 20 degrees Celsius. So we're talking about there, Mach 1 for a train might be 1,236 kilometres an hour at 20 degrees Celsius, but Mach 1 for a plane, given the fact that it's going to be up at, say, 10,000 metres, might be 1,083 kilometres an hour. So when people talk about Mach and they're going, this train goes at Mach 1 and this plane goes at Mach 1, I'll get there quicker on the train travelling at Mach 1 rather than a plane. And you know the classic question that you ask to trick people, which is heavier, a kilogram of feathers or a kilogram of lead? And people go, oh, that's a trick question. Everyone knows it's a kilogram. Well, there's a good trick question here, which is faster, Mach 1 on a train or Mach 1 on a plane? And in this case, Mach 1 on a train.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting that we measure something in terms of, why don't we just say how many kilometres an hour or how many metres per second this plane or train are travelling at. We've come up with this Mach 1 measurement, a bit like when we talk about volume, how many swimming pools is the volume measurement. In this case, it's a funny thing that we measure the speeds via Mach, and even though Mach is not a consistent measure, when we do other measurements, we try and have a consistent standard. So anyway, just an interesting little aside there. But again, I'm excited. 2029, maybe 2030 before it gets to Australia, supersonic flight, I want to be there.
Yeah, and that'll be amazing if you can commute, you know, backwards and forwards from places like Sydney and Darwin and Sydney and Perth and whatnot. Bring it on. Yeah,
well, Sydney, Melbourne, we've talked about that, getting up to Mach 1.7.
Well, it's already, like, is it down to an hour already, Sydney and Melbourne?
No, when I've flown that, it's typically an hour 20 or something.
Okay.
Because you're only going about, I think, top speeds there, 900 kilometres an hour maybe.
Yeah.
So, and it's about 1,000 kilometres, say, and then you've got to take up and get to speed and all that sort of stuff. So, yeah, it might even be an hour and a half. I can't remember exactly. I think Sydney-Brisbane's more like an hour and a half, and maybe Melbourne's a little bit less than that.
Yeah, right.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, it's time to bring this plane into land, folks. Clear the runway. We're coming in hot. Thanks for another cracking tech talk, Matt.
Well, I am a bit concerned because I've just got this camera I can see in the corner of my eye, and it's just turning around to face towards me. So I don't want to walk out of here all different colours. So we better get cracking, James.
It's going to hurt. I'm thinking of the merits of booby trapping the outside of the house and leaving the rest to ChatGPT. Let's see how we go with the front door cam, just for the gigs. Thanks for tuning in again, folks. Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson comes to you 99% sugar-free with no traces of nuts, lactose, gluten and egg protein or shellfish. So you know it's good for everybody. I'm James Eddy, urging you to join us again in 1 week's time, and we'll have a brand new episode ready for you to freshly unwrap. You can smell the freshness bursting from the first click. Don't forget to share us with your friends. We'll catch you then.